Hello, my name is Stefan Kartman. Welcome to my presentation on making your daily practice count. First, I'd like to thank you for sharing this presentation with me, and also I'd like to thank all of you for joining us at the Green Mountain Chamber Music Festival this summer. By now, we've been enjoying a week and a half of 4 hours of uninterrupted individual practice every day, and we've been enjoying the benefits of that. And it occurs to me that when I was a student many years ago, a teenager, and I was confronted with the expectation that I fulfill 4 hours of practice in a day, I was daunted by the task because I really didn't know how to fill that time up with my practice. And in those days, we didn't have the same kinds of distractions that students have today. We didn't have cell phones or video games or social media. I had in my room at Meadowmount a cello, some books. I don't even think I had anything to listen to music with. And I had a watch with a second hand that fulfilled two functions for me. One was to mark the seconds as it got closer and closer to the ultimate ambition of getting the hell out of the room, and also I used it to practice scales sometimes. Well, you get the idea. I don't think I even knew why I was practicing scales. I just did it because my teacher told me to. And over the years, I've been reflecting on that business of having an organized daily regimen. I remember when I was just a little kid, I would listen to my dad, a violinist, practicing Dunas exercises, and these are finger spacing exercises if you're not familiar with them. Every time I heard those particular exercises coming out of his practice room, I always knew that there was a concert that was imminent, and I was always surprised by how much time he spent on those, and yet I never got to hear him perform them on a stage. So in my innocence, I didn't understand how important it was to have an organized daily regimen that didn't necessarily have an obvious connection to the repertoire that he was playing. Well, now time has passed and I realize that it is important to have a daily regimen. I have made a whole book for my own students that has daily exercises that I've drawn from this or that technical material from violin, cello, viola, anything that was out there. I tried to find a use for and figure out what things were the most useful. And so what is a useful exercise for your daily technical regimen? Well, one of the things that I found with my students is that as they're practicing their scales, as they get around this part of the instrument, that's kind of a special zone. It's an area where the hand has to change its angle to the string. I'm sure there is an equivalent on violin when you have to come around the bout of the instrument, get under it, and put your thumb on the side of the instrument. For us, our thumb has to come up on top, and we wind up with a position that feels strange and different when we get there the first time. So here's an exercise that has different groups of intervals on the bottom and on the top. And because so much of cello technique is organized around 3-note groups, I have different 3-note spacings on the bottom and the top, and so I wind up with 6 notes, and so I call this a hexachord exercise. Well, let's talk. Let me play it a little bit for you so you get the idea. The idea. These are diatonic combinations of whole steps and half steps that you might find in major and minor scales. And it goes through the same pattern of placement. I don't know if you noticed, but the same pattern of placement, the same ordering of fingers again and again. So it's easy to memorize, and you can use it at any point in your repertoire where you're having some difficulty finding the new grouping of fingers. And it doesn't just have to be done in this position around the bout of the instrument, but it can be done back here. You get the idea? So this is a particularly useful exercise, and I'm going to show you the application of it in some repertoire in just a couple of minutes. All right, so moving on, here's another exercise, and this one I actually picked up from a violinist by the name of Tibor Varga. Now, I didn't know Tibor Varga, but I did follow these, the way they play books, which were books that kind of glorified great violinists and cellists and violists, and talked a little bit about how they learned to do what they did. They're a lot of fun. I don't know if you can still find them, but at that point I was hungry for information on how these people became so good at what they did. His exercise, which was part of his 1 page of violin technique, and you know, he would apparently practice this page every day, and it kept him facile, first of all, kept his muscles strong and limber, and helped with his muscle memory when it came to remembering the spacings of the fingers. He would practice this, I think, 45 minutes or a half hour every day, and this was one of the exercises that I found particularly useful. Now I'm going to do just the first measure of each line, because the first measure is the new group of spacings of the intervals. So I'll show you what I mean. This exercise goes from all half steps to all whole steps and all of the things in between. So it's a chromatic exercise, meaning that it isn't necessarily going after the diatonic intervals, but it does incidentally along the way. So sounds like a major scale, right? And that's one of the groupings, one of the most popular ones. But I'll go through all of them and you'll see. And then you could start the exercise a half step up, as I just was about to do. Now, it's likely that Tibor Varga didn't just do these ascending and descending pattern, but that he did things like and other things like that. So I assign to my students a 4-note, but you know, you have 4 notes up there. There's many different orderings of the fingers that you could put down. Sorry, I'm having technical issues here. Maybe it's a little easier to pick this exercise up from a text version of it. Just so you understand what you're looking at, these are the fingers that are coming down: thumb, first finger, second finger, third finger. On violin, the equivalent would be 1, 2, 3, 4, obviously. And these are the spacings between the fingers. Okay? Now, what I have down here are some suggested patterns, the ordering of putting the fingers down. So if I was to do that first set up there at the top, that was all half steps, and I used these finger patterns to do it, it would sound like this. So that's kind of a basic 4-note grouping. It doesn't have to be done in that order. There are other patterns. For instance, if I inverted the thing, it might sound like this. But doing all of these spacings with each one of the groupings. Well, what can I say? It builds familiarity with the spaces of the diatonic combinations and also the chromatic possibilities. So now with these two exercises, I'm going to now go into a piece that is typically assigned to students when they're early on in their move up here past fourth position, the Haydn C major cello concerto. Let me play a little bit of it for you and give you an idea what's there, and then we're going to focus on if you'll just humor me. It's only 2 minutes, this one page, but here's the piece. You'll recognize it. I played 2 minutes of it for you, and we're going to use some parts of it, the second half, to demonstrate using those technical exercises and how they can help to improve a performance of it. Okay, so this is measure 36. You already heard it. There you see it, and I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about analyzing a passage and seeing how you can use some technical exercises to help you practice it. So in this case, it's we're first of all finding the spacings between the fingers. Okay, so this is one of the groupings in that chromatic thumb position exercise that I was showing you before. Right? Let me see. Okay, it would be this first one here. Okay, and it's whole step, half step, whole step. Right? And so to gain the familiarity with that spacing up there in thumb position, the first thing that I would do is I'd go ahead and use that chromatic thumb position exercise just to kind of reinforce those intervals. I mean, one could even do the inversions and other patterns. Okay, but that's not all there is to the passage. Now, this one doesn't happen to be one of the combinations because we have... So this is outside of the whole step and half step arrangement that we had in any of those chromatic thumb position exercises. But the exercise itself and the patterns that we were using can be applied to this particular grouping of intervals as well. So instead of just going over this, I mean, perhaps putting on a drone to tune it, you know, is something that might be helpful. Just kind of checking out the intervals and listening carefully. That's an important part of the discovery stage. But getting the fingers to remember, it's good to have an exercise. Oops. Okay. So, so the big challenge here is this grouping and this grouping. And getting from one to the other and being used to changing that spacing. Right? So the next thing I'd like to do is to reinforce that group that's on the D string. Actually, that group that's on the D string. And here it is. Okay, is make sure that I can go from one spacing to the other. And I want to say that as you become better at handling multiple tasks, you want to ramp up the new skill bit by bit. So rather than the whole business of and rather than dealing with the two strings, let's just do this on one string where we have to do those intervals. And hang on a second here. Okay, and do that on one string. We'll do this on. We'll do this first on the D string. And so here we have an example of the spacings that we have. Right. That's the whole step, half step, whole step spacing that we had up there on the. Right. But on the D string. Right. And then the new spacing. Right? And if you do one after the other, you're teaching yourself the skill of going from one to the other. So again, practicing this with a drone will help you to get the sonority of the instrument and also to get the sound of the intervals in your ear. Okay. Next, I'd like to do that same task, but on the A string. And again, practicing, please, more carefully than what I'm doing right now with a drone, and listening carefully for these intervals is really important. So once you've got the hang of the two different spacings, and really there's nothing different in the top portion of it. You've got a half step between 1 and 2 and a whole step between 2 and 3. And really all you're doing is moving that space between the thumb, right, and going over to the D string to do it. Then the good next step would be to go and do the spacing on the A string and then on the D string. So just to show you where I am. Okay. Okay, by the time you get good at all of these different exercises, then the passage itself becomes a little bit easier to play, and that's one of the things that can give you some confidence and allow you to play the thing as it's meant to be played with abandon, I guess, for lack of a better thing to call it. Okay, moving on. I'd like to talk about another passage in it in this piece And I'm going to use some of the items that we already talked about, the thumb position exercise with the chromatic spacings. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about velocity in this passage because, well, just to give you an idea what's going on in the passage, let's see here. I have to make sure. Okay, we've got it. All right. So the passage that I'm talking about is so once again, I'm going to first kind of analyze what is in the passage before I design an exercise that's gonna help me. Well, first of all, well, what do you know? We've got one of those groupings from the chromatic thumb position exercise. So once again, we can become familiar with the spacing, right? On the D string, it's a whole step between thumb and 1, whole step between 1 and 2, and a half step between 2 and 3. And on the D string, on the A string, we happen to have the same spacing, right? It's just a major scale, but that spacing down in here may be a challenge for some. So, you know, right? And then, well, there's a different spacing. Right there again, we've got the same arrangement of spaces between the fingers on the D string that on the D string that we have on the A string. Half step, whole step, whole step, right? Half step, whole step, whole step, same thing, right? So we could do or preferably both. And the last part of this particular passage, so right, there's a different spacing on the bottom group than there is. So again, we'll do the same kind of practice that we would have done with the chromatics when we were kind of researching that melody back there at measure 36. So now we have an added component to this, and that's the velocity of it. Okay, it's going by pretty quickly. In Galamian's book, there is a seemingly endless list of rhythms that one can use to help improve the velocity and the evenness of a passage. Why would one practice different rhythms to get it even? Well, because one doesn't just practice one rhythm. That would make it more uneven. You practice the opposing rhythms as well. And I'll show you a little bit about how to figure out which rhythms should be used now. Here's a rhythmic practice chart that gives several different rhythms. So if I take those 2-note rhythms, which are what most people start with when they're practicing a passage, and I go back to my passage, now the reason why I'm not going to start with 2-note rhythms in this, unless I really feel like I can't handle the 3-note rhythms, is because I try not to give myself the distraction of extra challenges. So for instance, when you're playing a 2-note rhythm and you're doing the original bowing, and I think one should do the original bowing of all separate bows here, because that's part of the game, is kind of getting the hands to coordinate. You've got this business of having a longer down bow than up bow. And so in order to keep yourself from working your way out to the tip, you've got to constantly be jabbing that up bow. So that's not the rhythm that I would choose to work on a passage that has all separate bows in it. The rhythm that I would choose is the 3-note rhythm, because when you do 3-note rhythms, you've got a long down bow and then a long up bow. And that helps to kind of keep you in the same area of the bow without having to do any extra bow speeds or any jabs, just to kind of keep you in the same place. So the way that would look is, okay, well, Here you see the passage as it exists in the music, right? And here is that set of rhythms, the 3-note rhythms. Okay, now you may find at first that when you're practicing 3-note rhythms and you're superimposing it on a 4-note pattern as we have here, that it's a little bit of a, I don't know, it's a little bit of a brain twister. It doesn't really seem to fit in the passage. But you can get used to it. It's possible to get used to it. All right, I'm going to run you through the other 2 of the 3-note rhythms. So that's a long first note and short second and third note. Now I'm going to move to the long middle note. Let me see. You know, these rhythms, after you play the first note, they all sound like bada bing, bada bang, bada boom, you know? You know, or you know, eventually they all sound the same. And the difference is that we're moving it over by 1 note. So we have a different long note this time when we're doing the long second note. And that looks like this and sounds like this. So that's long second note. Okay, let me run you through. There's the long third note we're looking for. Okay, so theoretically, by the time you've gotten through these 3-note patterns and you've done all of the possible ways of doing the 3 notes, but let's say you're getting ready for your Tchaikovsky International Competition or your debut in Carnegie Hall, and you've already done those 3-note patterns and you're looking for something different. Well, here's the different. You can actually combine a couple of the 3-note patterns and form a new pattern. So here we have a long first note, right? And if you join that with a long third note, that pattern happens, long first note plus long third note, is exhibited right here. Sorry, I'm crossing things out instead of underlining. Long first note plus a long third note looks like this. It sounds bump, bada bada bump. Okay? So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and show you that. Now, in case you're wondering why I skipped over combining the long first note with the long second note, hang on a second, let me, oh goodness gracious, I'm going crazy here. Let's see. Okay, in case you're wondering why I didn't go ahead and do the long first note plus the long second note, it's because when you're doing all separate bows, you have to choose a pattern that alternates between a down bow long note and an up bow long note. So I could have done the long first note plus the long second note. That would have been bum bada badampa, bum bada badampa, bum bada badampa. The problem with that is if you're doing all separate bows, the same problem that we had when we were trying to do two note patterns. Always the long note is on a down bow. So I'm intentionally skipping over that long second note and doing instead the long third note. Goodness gracious. Okay. And that looks like this. I have it rebarred here, but it's the same thing. Not, I mean, I just have a different barring for the thing. So you can see that there are a lot of other possibilities here. When you boil it down to what the rhythm actually is, it's 2 long notes in a row followed by 4 short notes. And that pattern over and over again, right? And you can start that pattern anywhere and do the same thing that we did with the 3-note rhythmic patterns, right? You can move it over by 1 basically. So the reason why I'm starting with my rhythmic practice on this with this one is really only nostalgia. Does anyone recognize this rhythm, by the way? All right. Well, back to those bad old days of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and the patterns that Suzuki gave us to practice. If you do that pattern and you move it over by 1, you get a whole series of other combinations that you can do. I'll show you what I mean. So. Okay, so that's combining a long first note and a long third note into a pattern, and then I can move it over by 1. Okay, so that's the next combination here. And so okay, I'm just going to go through the rest of these. Okay, I want to say that these are like the extra credit rhythms. What's going on here is I'm not allowing myself to get in a rut. Now that's what happened to me that first summer that I spent at Meadowmount. I would play the same passages over and over again, and I would find that either I wasn't getting better as I had hoped, or even it would get worse at times. And the way that happens is, well, if you have an interval that's a little too widely spaced in your fingers or a little too narrow and it's not exactly in tune, you only have to do that like 2 or maybe 3 times before your ear starts to kind of give up, I want to say. It starts to hear that as being the true intonation. And then pretty soon your fingers really start to remember it again and again. And then it's kind of too late in a way. In order to fix that, you really have to go through a lot of extra effort in order to get that interval to work properly for you. So now where are we? We've tried out a couple of the daily exercises, the hexachord exercise. We've tried out some of the exercises that emphasize finger spacing in the thumb position. Right? And the patterns therein. We've also worked a little bit with rhythms. So armed with only these 3 tools, I want to give you an idea how you can take a passage that requires a little more from us. It's a combination of elements, and use these daily exercises that have already become, let's say, so familiar to us that we're just kind of swimming in them. If we come to a passage and there's a spot that we have difficulty with, we know that we can use the rhythms there, or if it's a velocity passage, say, or if we're having trouble getting around the bout of the instrument and getting the interval spacing to be right from one position to the next, we know we can do the around the bout exercise. If we've got some interesting spacings up here between fingers and we need to reinforce the spacing and get our hand to remember it, well, we've got our thumb position exercise that goes over many of those, almost all of them. So now let's take a passage, and this is the most challenging one at the end of the first page of the Haydn C major concerto that we've been working with. I'll show you what it's like. Now, try not to pay too much attention to the rhythms yet. I put them in there below the passage itself because I know that because the passage itself has got some velocity to it. I know we're going to wind up doing them. So we'll get to that in a minute. First, I wanna play the passage so that you'll remember what it's like. It goes something like this. Okay, I'd like to improve that, and I know that already I have some tools to do that. So first of all, let's go back and look at a couple of the things that we've done already. Remember, hexachords, chromatic thumb position exercise, and rhythms. Okay, you see the rhythms here on the page. What about that hexachord exercise? Where might that apply in this piece? Well, we run into it right away as we're going. You know, and as long as I'm practicing it, why don't I do something like what I would do if it was in real life? Listen carefully, put a drone on that matches the tonality of this section of the piece. So I'm already identifying. I've got a whole step between 1 and 3, half step between 3 and 4. I've got my shift to thumb, whole step between thumb and first finger, whole step between first finger and second finger. So okay, so you see I already had a little bit of trouble shifting to that second finger in the open position, right? So I'm already going to start to use my rhythms to just reinforce that section. Again, I guess I'll leave the drone on. I hope it's not too irritating to you. It eventually will irritate me and I'll have to turn it off. Okay, that's the first of the 3-note rhythms. Let me back it up here and show you those rhythms. There we go. Okay, that's the first of the 3-note rhythms. We're going to move on and do, come on thing. Okay, we're going to do the second of those. Actually, this is starting to irritate me. Again, I should have left it on, but okay, so there you hear me going after the second note. Again, if I wasn't in a hurry, I'd be doing these more carefully and making sure that I could repeat it more than once. The 3-note rhythms then. I'm already starting to feel a little bit more confident. Okay, that part's starting to feel a little bit more confident. Let's say I still wanted to go over because, you know, not all of those notes were perfectly secure every time. Well, now I'm going to go into the 3-note combinations, and this time I'm going to do all of them. I'm not doing the separate bows just yet because what I'm trying to work with right now is just getting familiarity in this region between these two groups of notes. So I'm going to hit that first of the 3-note rhythm combinations. That's a long first note and a long second note, and repeat it, a long first note and a long second note. This time we're not really worrying about bowing, so we can do all of these combinations. That's a good one for finding the note after the shift, so that when you shift, you automatically try and find that distance right away, because you got to do it quickly now. All right, I'm having some more patience. Let's try it with the drum. You know, this could be done with the tonic of this passage, or sorry, with the fifth of the passage, or you can do it with both actually. I don't want to get too fancy, but okay, we could do then the long first note plus the long third note. Now we're going to play a long second note and then a long first note. And again, repeat a long second note and a long first note. The passage is really starting to settle down for me already, and I haven't even done all of the rhythms. Okay, now we're going to do a long second note plus a long third note. That sounds like this. Okay, I don't mean to bring you in my practice room, but I kind of do also. Okay, that's a long second note plus a long third note. Okay, we only have two more to do, and I'll try and do these a little faster. Maybe I won't be quite as careful with them. Now we're going to do a long third note and a long second note. Long third note, long second note. That sounds like this. And then finally we're going to have a long third note plus a long first note, and you'll recognize that as the pepperoni pizza theme there. Okay, now by the time I've done all of these rhythms and in this position, I'm really starting to get comfortable with, that's really starting to settle for me nicely. So now let's move on to the next part of the passage. We've got a 4-note grouping. Well, you know what we can do with that, right? We've got our thumb position chromatic exercise. Can do it inverted, you know. Okay, that's not a very difficult one, so I don't want to spend much time with it because I've already shown you how to do that part. Next part of it, another one of the typical groupings: whole step, half step, whole step. Again, thumb position exercise for this. It's sitting right there. And because I'm familiar now with both of these, and maybe I don't have to go through the whole routine of doing. But it's always there for us if we need it. You can use these two exercises, this same exercise, I should say, but with the two different groupings of notes, the two different whole step, half step combinations to get familiar with. And the thing that really is new territory for me in this is that now I've got to do so I've got a new spacing on my fingers that I haven't used in any of those chromatic thumb position exercises before. Well, that doesn't have to stop me. I don't have to say, oh, that's not one of my exercises, I can't do that. Instead, I can find this new group and use some of the patterns from the thumb position exercise that are familiar to me. For instance, so let me show you how I got here. My passage, so I've got this, and for a split second, I've got this opening here, and I'm going to close it to a new group. So this is really new territory. It's this spacing and then this one. And while this, that's old hat, and this, that one also is old news for me. I know both of those. The move from the one to the other is a little complicated. So I'm going to work that combination just a little bit. I'll do something similar to what I did in that first melody where I showed you the chromatic thumb position exercise. Remember how we did one and then the other of the patterns. So let's try that here and see if it's useful to us. I guess it's probably a good idea to keep that on, huh? See. part of the chromatic thumb position exercise is just the function of identifying intervals. We're not really doing any velocity training to kind of get the fingers to remember exactly, but we're familiarizing ourselves enough with that at a slow speed at least. Okay, now guess what? I just found another one of the places where we can use our exercises. You remember that chromatic, not the chromatic, you remember the hexachord exercise that we did back here? The 3-note groupings, and we also did it down here. Well, you know what? You can also do this exercise in thumb position. There's nothing stopping you from using exactly the same exercise. I'll show you. Okay, so here we go. We've got a whole step and a half step on the bottom part of the hexachord. And we've got 2 whole steps. That's traditionally kind of a difficult combination for cellists because playing whole steps between 2 and 3 starts to feel a little bit wide to us. Okay, it's not something that we normally do down in first position, for instance. So we've got oh boy, never goes away, intonation. Don't think that when you get older and you're really good, you're going to have to stop working on it. Not settling for me, right? I feel like it's unfamiliar territory for me a little bit. So what do you do when you want to get your fingers to remember spaces and you want to get them to remember them quickly? You do okay, and I can do all of those same rhythms that I did down here. So at this point, I think you're seeing where I'm going with the passage. After you've identified and worked a little bit with each one of the regions and you figure out what methods you can use for them, then you can go back and do the same thing that we did with that other velocity passage. And here is where the rhythms that I put in here before are going to come in handy. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's do a G for it this time. Let's do, okay, so I'm now doing, not the passage, well, of course I'm playing the passage. No, what I'm doing now is I'm starting in on the rhythms for the passage. So three note rhythms. This is the long first note. Okay, so let's try the long second note. Come on, mark things. There we go. So we're going for a long second note. Okay, let's go now for a long third note. You can see I'm in a big hurry now because I'm starting to feel that I'm running out of time. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the combination rhythms. We've done that before on that other scale passage. I'll show you the first one just to kind of give you the idea. Again, I'm going to start in on that pepperoni pizza rhythm. Okay, so there's that one, and of course I could go through the rest of them. But I just want to express to you how much better I feel about this little bit of practice that I did on this, because I was organized about it. I took the tools that I already knew, and remember, these are only 3 tools: rhythms, hexachords, and chromatic thumb position exercise. We took those things, and because we were so familiar with them, we could just apply them to the various areas of it, or we could apply them to the whole passage. And the passage already feels better to me. Well, I hope I play it better. Now I'm nervous about it. Now, I don't know whether I played it better, but it felt better to me. So, what's the moral of this story? What I've been talking to you the whole time about is having some kind of a daily regimen for yourself where not only these two exercises, but other ones. Exercises, for instance, where you work with your vibrato speed. Let me give you a small sample of it. Let's see here. If you were to work with your vibrato speed and use the Galamian scale system, you remember that old Galamian system where you play and then you go to and then etc. Well, you know what? Here's combining two exercises. A scale that you know that practices subdivisions of duples and triples alternating, and vibrato exercise. So here we go. To yourself, oh my gosh, that's pedantic. Why would I ever want to play vibrato this slow? Well, the reason why I do it is because it helps me to stretch out my finger. And the reason why I go successively faster rhythmically with the piece is so that I learn some control over my vibrato speed, so that I'm not playing one vibrato speed all the time. And then I can do things like that's a piece by Schumann, a cello piece. You know, you can do Beethoven C major. So all of that grew out of my ability to play a vibrato speed that I can change at will from the slowest to the fastest. Allows me to express myself without thought, not pedantically, because I'm so much in control of the technique that I have over the instrument that I can express myself with vigor or tranquility, and that sound, just the feelings that are in me. I don't think about speeding up my vibrato. I just think about the intensity of my feelings in that place, and it happens because I've worked on these things in my workroom every day. So that's why it's important that you have a daily regimen that you work on, half hour, 45 minutes, where you make yourself healthy on your instrument, and you can use those exercises applied to your repertoire to help you to build security so that you can really express yourself. So I hope this wasn't too boring. I know it was very technical, but the end result is what's so very exciting about all of this. The fact that you can do exactly what you want on your instrument without thought. That's my goal, not putting you into this little technical box. Now, you're all going to be in that room for 4 hours a day, and you can use that time that you have for good or for evil. And I suggest to you that you enjoy your practice because you see the fruits of your labors. If you just go at a passage again and again and again and just play it out of tune in the same way each time, all you're doing is, well, basically you're practicing to play it out of tune, and that just doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions for you. Before I do that, I want to wish you well and hope that you have good practice all of this week and for the next 2 weeks, and that you all become the great artists that I know you can become. Okay, thanks for joining me for this presentation.